The early morning mist blanketed the Himalayas like a thin veil stretched between the real world and a dreamscape. On a towering cliff, a man stood still, Waldo, 34 years old. A wildlife photographer specializing in capturing nature's rarest moments. He had experienced hundreds of mornings like this, shoes soaked in dew. Camera slung over his shoulder. Carefully threading through ancient forests just to catch the first light shining upon the wild. That morning, the sun had just risen on the distant horizon, casting golden rays across the valley still steeped in slumber. The trees stood silent, broken only by the soft crunch of Waldo's footsteps on a bed of dry pine needles. He smiled. This was the moment he lived for, perfect light, serene scenery, and a feeling that the whole world was holding its breath. He climbed out onto a narrow ledge, the very spot where he had once captured the image of an eagle taking flight the year before. Below him yawned a bottomless abyss. Behind him, the dense forest tangled with roots like a maze. Ahead, the sky stretched open and infinite. He thought he was alone. Until a sound shattered the silence. Grr! A growl, low, broken, spine-chilling, not the call of territory, nor a threat. It was the sound of pain. Waldo froze, his eyes locked on the opposite treeline. His heart pounded. Could be a wild boar. Maybe a leopard. He slowly turned, still gripping his camera instinctively, as if to shield himself. And then he saw it. Just a few meters away, at the edge of a landslide slope, a fully grown tigress was trapped. Magnificent, massive, her orange-black coat now soaked in blood. One leg was pinned beneath a sharp-edged slab of rock. Her body strained upward in agony. Chest heaving, claws digging into the soil, but she couldn't move. Waldo held his breath, not out of fear, but because of the look in her eyes. Not fierce, not threatening, just pleading. It was a look that made the heart of a man, hardened by years behind a steel lens, suddenly tremble. He knew, if he stepped forward, he might be killed. But if he turned away, she would die. Waldo stood motionless, as if he himself had been frozen by that growl, not the sound of a predator, but the cry of a living being teetering on the edge of death. The tigress was still there, trembling, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Her front leg was pinned beneath a massive slab of rock, claws scratching helplessly in the wet earth. Blood flowed in steady streams, staining the mossy forest floor crimson. And through each trembling breath, her eyes remained fixed on him, not like a predator watching prey, but like a mother pleading for salvation for something greater than herself. Waldo took a step back. Part of his instinct screamed, "Run!" But another part, the part that had led him through countless wild places, the part that had learned that nature, too, has its own language, whispered, "Stay." A breeze swept through the forest, carrying with it a strange sound, a faint, high-pitched cry, like that of a kitten, echoing somewhere in the thicket behind the tigress. Cubs, her young. He understood. This wasn't just a wounded tiger. This was a dying mother, still clinging to life to protect her cubs. Suddenly, all those lectures about not interfering with nature's cycle felt hollow. In front of him now, it wasn't instinct, it was trust. Waldo looked around. No people, no help. His backpack held only his camera, lenses, and a satellite phone with no signal. He bent down, searching for a sturdy branch, the only tool he might use to lever the rock away. He stepped closer, inch by careful inch. The ground was soft, the moss slippery. Each step held the risk of a fall. And if that happened, he would tumble with the tigress into the abyss. As he slid the branch beneath the rock, the tigress flinched, a low growl escaped, but she didn't strike. She didn't move, she just looked at him. Waldo gritted his teeth. His hands trembled as he began to push the branch. The slab was heavier than he'd imagined. It wouldn't budge. He pressed harder. A cracking sound. The branch split partway. The tigress snarled, but still didn't lash out. Just a little more. Just a little more. Crack. The stone shifted. The tigress yanked her leg free, slipping out from the crevice, leaving a long trail of blood behind her. Waldo stumbled back, heart pounding like a war drum. This was the moment of fate. Either he'd be mauled, or... The tigress backed away. No roar, no charge. She limped, then disappeared into the dense undergrowth. Waldo stood there, alone in the wilderness, shaking. He didn't know it then. But from that moment on, his life would never be the same. Waldo didn't leave the cliff right away. He stood there, silent, amid the morning mist, as if his soul had just been swept into some invisible current. Powerful, sacred, and full of contradiction. His hands were still trembling. Adrenaline not yet faded, but the feeling in his chest had shifted, from fear to something harder to name. Connection, perhaps. He sat down on the stone ledge and took a deep breath. The forest wind slapped cool against his face. But inside, he burned. Part of Waldo wanted to return to camp, document everything he had witnessed, and leave it behind as a private memory. But he couldn't. Somewhere in the depths of the forest, the tigress was now dragging herself forward with a wound still unhealed. And those faint cries, the two cubs, still echoed in his ears. He packed up his gear, slung the backpack over his shoulder, and turned toward the forest, following the direction where the tiger had vanished. Not out of curiosity, but because he felt he had become part of something greater. His steps were slow, but steady, through faint traces of blood, deep pawprints in wet mud, broken branches. Waldo followed every clue the mother tiger had left behind. Each sign felt like a thread connecting two worlds, man and wild. And then, the sound returned. This time, closer, clearer, two faint whimpers, trembling, like calls for a mother. Waldo stopped, crouched low, and gently parted the dense ferns. His heart clenched. Beneath a fallen tree, two tiger cubs, tiny, their fur still fluffy, were curled up. One of them was licking a wound on the other's leg. The cut wasn't deep, but it clearly made walking difficult. Waldo didn't move. He knew, even if the mother tiger wasn't nearby, his presence was still an intrusion. And then, a sound behind him. Crack. Waldo spun around on instinct. She was back. The tigress, blood still smeared down her leg, emerged from the tree line. Her eyes no longer held panic, but something else, wary. But not threatening. Waldo stood still. Slowly, he raised his hands, just as he had done before. A gesture without language, but perhaps understood. The tigress moved forward. Slow, direct. Her gaze never left him, but she didn't growl. And then, with a quiet, regal calm, she walked past Waldo, toward her cubs. He held his breath. Every second stretched into eternity. The tigress lay down beside them, gave a soft groan, and began licking the injured cub's wound. The little ones whimpered gently and nestled into their mother's belly. Waldo couldn't believe what he was seeing. He hadn't just been spared. He was witnessing something no one had ever captured, a ritual of trust. And in that moment, in the heart of the forest, between mother and cubs, between the scent of blood and breath, between shafts of light through the leaves, Waldo understood. He had been chosen. Waldo sat there, just a few meters from the tiger family. On a thick, damp bed of moss, his heartbeat pulsing in rhythm with the breath of the forest. Morning light filtered through the canopy, casting a golden veil, as if nature itself had draped this scene in a sacred cloak. He didn't dare move, not out of fear, but out of reverence. The tigress, now he could see clearly, was gaunt from hunger. Her shoulder gashed, her eyes carrying a quiet endurance that few humans could ever comprehend. She didn't snarl, didn't growl. She simply mothered, using her bloodied body to shelter her two young. Waldo had never seen anything like it. Not through a lens, not in a documentary, not in any survival course. Between him and that creature, the divide of human and beast no longer existed. What remained were two living beings, both afraid, both yearning to protect, gently brushing the edge of each other's world. And at that edge, there was no language, only silence. He lowered his head slightly, as a gesture of respect, though he knew the tiger likely didn't understand. But deep down, he believed it felt something. A moment later, the tigress met his gaze. No longer pleading, like on the cliff, but acknowledging. We've seen each other, that look seemed to say. Not in form, but in essence. Waldo thought, if I had a camera right now, I wouldn't press the shutter. Because no photograph could ever capture the depth of this moment. Only memory could hold something this sacred. Minutes passed, or perhaps a lifetime. He no longer knew. The tigress closed her eyes, letting the cubs curl up beneath her belly. Her breath slowed, not from exhaustion but from peace. And in that moment, Waldo understood. He no longer needed to stay. He slowly rose, stepped back, one step at a time. He didn't turn his back. He didn't make a sound. Before leaving, he looked one last time. And in the final ray of sunlight caught in her fur, Waldo swore he saw a shimmer, like a tear. Perhaps it was his imagination. Perhaps it was just the light. But maybe it was a farewell. Waldo left the taiga's sanctuary like a man walking out of a dream, not a beautiful dream, but a sacred reality untouched by the civilized world. Beneath his feet, every snapping twig whispered softly. Above him, the forest still held mist. But inside him, something had changed. Forever. He returned to the research camp near noon. Silent. His colleagues saw his face, pale, dirt-streaked, his eyes dimmed with emotion, and no one asked anything. They assumed he was simply exhausted from an early trek. Waldo didn't speak, not because he feared ridicule, but because he knew language was not enough. In the days that followed, he began returning to the cliff, where it had all begun. Not to photograph, not to study, but to wait. Every morning, before the sun tore through the fog, he was there, sitting still like a stone, like a silent sentinel for something greater than himself. 1 week passed, then 2. Sometimes, he spotted fresh tracks, smaller, more agile. Once, he found a dried bloodstain at the base of a tree. And he knew the tiger and her cubs were still alive. Then one morning, in a veil of mist as thin as silk, he saw movement among the foliage. A single ear rose, a striped shadow slipped through. And then, the tigress, emerging from the forest like a phantom of the past. It was still her, but no longer wounded. Her shoulder had healed. Her eyes were bright. Waldo froze. His heartbeat caught. Beside her, the 2 cubs, now bigger, bolder. One even crept near the cliff's edge, curious about a bird's call. And just as Waldo thought he might wait a lifetime to see those eyes again, she looked up. Her gaze, like the first time they met. But this time, not pleading, acknowledging, silently, yet with certainty. Nature had spoken, not with a roar, not with gunfire, but with a look, and a return. Waldo bowed his head, deeply, not as a victor, but as one who had been chosen. 3 days after that miraculous reunion, Waldo sat on the familiar rock when an unusual sound echoed from the northern part of the forest. It wasn't birdsong. It wasn't the rustling wind. It was metal, dry, cold, and alien to the rhythm of this place. He held his breath. A minute later, the crunching of tires on forest soil became unmistakable. Someone was intruding, and Waldo understood instantly. Poachers. Despite fences and a ranger force protecting the reserve, he knew the law here wasn't strong enough to stop the greedy. A tigress with 2 cubs? That was a prize they wouldn't ignore. Without hesitation, Waldo rushed back to camp and alerted the rangers. He and a young ranger named Arun quickly returned to the northern sector of the forest. They brought no camera, only hope to stop a tragedy. The path through the forest was no longer the peaceful place he once cherished. Bootprints, spent bullet casings, strange muddy tracks. Each sign among the fallen leaves whispered a warning. And then, they found them, snare traps made of wire. 1, then 2, then a third, this one stained with a bit of blood and a tuft of tiger cub fur. Arun frowned. One of the cubs might have been injured, but got away. Waldo clenched his fists. His fear was gone, only anger remained. This was no longer a dance between photographer and nature. This was war, between life and greed. And now, he had chosen a side. Suddenly, in the thick air, a low growl rumbled through the trees. Not a warning, not a threat, but a signal, from the forest. To those it once accepted. We are under threat. Waldo and Arun looked at each other. No words were needed. They withdrew. To plan. To fight. The battle wasn't over. Night fell faster than usual. Cold winds howled through the canopy, bending dense jungled trees as if to foreshadow a looming catastrophe. Waldo and Arun moved silently through the forest. Their only sounds the crunch of leaves underfoot and the pounding of their hearts, enough to tear through the stillness. Then suddenly, a blast. Not thunder, not falling rocks. A gunshot. Arun bolted toward the sound. Waldo followed close behind, his camera still strapped to his side, not for capturing beauty now, but to record evidence. They reached a clearing in the forest. Where the crimson on the leaves wasn't autumn's paint, but blood. A tiger cub, wounded. Eyes wide in fear. Its hind leg caught in a trap. Blood soaking the golden fur that once gleamed like shattered sunlight. Waldo didn't think. He lunged forward. Instincts forgotten. He dropped to his knees, pulling out an emergency medical kit from his backpack. His hands trembled. Arun kept watch. "They'll come back," he said. Waldo replied softly, "So will I." As he dressed the cub's wound, a soft rustle came from the thicket. Waldo sprang to his feet. His hand gripped the camera lens, not as a tool now, but as instinctive defense. And then, she appeared. Zira, the tigress. Massive, silent, blood still oozing from an old wound that hadn't fully healed. But her eyes, no longer desperate. They held the fire of a warrior. A mother. Zira stepped forward. No growl. No threat. Only a gaze, from her eyes to Waldo. Then to her cub. In that moment, nature was no longer a stranger. Zira bowed her head. A simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. A bow of gratitude. Waldo swallowed hard, holding back tears. He once believed he had come to this forest to capture beautiful images. But now he knew. He was here to guard a soul. As night fell, the birds stopped singing. No more insects chirping, only a silence heavy as stone. A silence so thick, it felt like the forest was holding its breath. Zira, her shoulder still seeping blood, gently licked the forehead of her remaining cub, the only one left alive. Her eyes were filled with pain, but also unwavering resilience. She never left them, not a single step. Waldo and Arun crouched behind a tree, less than 10 meters away. Waldo whispered, "She knows we won't hurt them." Arun nodded, his face tense. But others don't think the same. And just then, heavy footsteps echoed from the east. Branches cracked, leaves flattened. Flashlights flickered through the trees like demonic eyes. 3 men, hunting rifles, faces covered. They spoke in the local dialect. But Waldo didn't need to understand the words. Their voices told him everything. They weren't rangers. Arun whispered. Grim. Poachers. Illegal hunters. Waldo tightened his grip around his camera lens. Eyes locked on Zira and her cub. He knew, one wrong move meant death. When one of the poachers raised his rifle, aiming directly at the bush where Zira was hiding, Waldo stepped out. No warning. No plan. Just instinct. He stepped into the line of fire. Both hands raised high. The flashlight blinded him, but he did not flinch. "Stop. Don't shoot. Get out of the way." One of them growled, rifle glinting in the dim light. "You don't know what you're doing." Waldo shouted. "This is a national reserve. You'll rot in prison if you fire that weapon." 1 second. Then 2. No one moved. And then, a roar shook the forest. Not from above, not from around, from the earth itself. Zira. She burst from the undergrowth like lightning, unleashing a sound that wasn't animal. It was a mother's declaration of war. The poachers scrambled. One fell, his rifle skidding away. But Zira didn't maul. She didn't kill. She protected. In the dim light, Waldo stood frozen, wide-eyed, body trembling. But inside, he no longer felt fear. Only gratitude. Early the next morning, when the mist still hung like silver webs draped over the forest, Waldo and Arun returned to the scene of the confrontation from the night before. Beneath the layer of decaying leaves, the chaotic footprints were still visible, large, heavy, and smeared with blood. A faint trail stretched from the underbrush where Zira had hidden, leading north, toward unprotected land. Waldo crouched down. A single dark, dried droplet of blood stained the leaf. Arun gently touched the nearby tree trunk. Deep claw marks had stripped the bark, and blood had seeped into the wood's grain. "Zira's hurt worse than we thought," Arun murmured. Waldo nodded, his eyes fixed on the misty horizon. "She didn't run out of fear. She led her cubs somewhere safe. But she's running out of time." And then they saw it, another trap. A steel wire snare, hidden beneath the forest debris, its loop still clinging to a few strands of distinctive orange and black fur. The blood beside it confirmed what they feared. One of the cubs had been caught. Waldo's heart clenched. "We can't let it end like this." He pulled out his camera, not to take photographs, but to document the evidence. The blood, the tracks, the trap, the coordinates, every detail. A story no one would believe. Unless they saw it with their own eyes. We need to get this out, Waldo said, his voice laced with iron resolve. Public outrage is the only force stronger than poachers. Arun nodded. But before we save the whole forest, we have to save Zira. Without hesitation, the two men resumed their pursuit. Following the trail of blood, the path narrowed, the slope steepened, the forest began to change hue. From lush green to a dusky red, glowing faintly like blood in the dying light. Then, they stopped. A faint whimper echoed through the dense underbrush. Zira. She lay curled beneath the branches of an ancient tree. Her breathing labored. Her two cubs huddled tightly against her belly. A deep wound on her shoulder had turned septic. She no longer had the strength to roar. Only a look, like that first day on the foggy cliff. Not pleading, not afraid, only trust. Waldo stepped forward, lowering himself beside her. No words, no movement, no camera, just presence and silence. The kind that only sacred things understand. The evening wind howled through the treetops, carrying the damp breath of the deep forest, and the faint metallic scent of blood. Zira, the tigress, lay motionless beneath the ancient tree. Her two cubs still clung to her gaunt body, as if the only thread tethering them to life was the shallow rhythm of her fading breath. Waldo stared at Zira, then down at the satellite phone in his hand, the only link he had to the outside world. But even he wasn't sure if that world would care enough to save a dying tiger. And if they say no? Arun whispered, as though reading his thoughts. Waldo squinted, jaw clenched. Then I won't ask, I'll take her anyway. He powered on the phone, tilting the antenna west-northwest, just enough to catch a flicker of signal. His only hope? The Langtang Wildlife Emergency Station, a last resort facility. Never before called to evacuate an injured adult tigress. Beep, beep, connection? Langtang receiving. This is Waldo, Northeast Zone. I have a severely injured tigress. Heavy blood loss. Immobile. Two cubs also at risk. Silence. Static crackled. Then, a woman's voice, startled but alert. Repeat? A tigress? With cubs? Yes. And if we don't intervene in the next 3 hours, she won't make it. No reply at first. Just keystrokes. A channel switch. Then, a firmer tone. Evac team en route. ETA 40 minutes. But you must guarantee absolute safety. If she wakes during transfer. I understand. I'll stay with her. Until it's done. 40 minutes passed in heavy silence. Waldo and Arun rigged a makeshift first aid shelter from canvas and broad leaves. Waldo held Zira's paw, not to comfort her, but to remind himself that he had stepped into something irreversible. He had chosen her side. Then, the unmistakable sound of helicopter rotors tore through the canopy. Birds burst into flight. A team of specialists descended with stretchers and tranquilizer kits. Quickly, Waldo urged. Use the small gauge. Her shoulders fractured. Zira opened her eyes as the needle touched her skin. But this time, no growl. No claws. Just a look, weary, but filled with something deeper. Gratitude. For the man who had saved her. Twice. As the helicopter lifted into the air, carrying Zira and her cubs. Waldo never looked away. He stood beneath the darkening forest. Eyes locked on the fading silhouette. As if a part of his heart was being carried with them. The Langtang Wildlife Clinic nestled quietly in the misty valley like a silent fortress in the heart of nature, but inside. It bore witness to battles of life and death without guns. Only blood, breath, and eyes that could not speak. Zira, the tigress who once ruled the eastern slopes of the forest, now lay behind a wall of transparent glass. Her 3-meter-long body covered in IV lines, bandages, and monitoring equipment. One of her shoulders was torn open, the bleeding had stopped. But the muscle still twitched whenever there was a loud noise. Under the cold white lights, Zira was no longer a symbol of power, but a living statue of struggle and sacrifice. Waldo stood behind that glass, eyes fixed on her. He had been there for 48 straight hours, leaving only when the doctors forced him to sleep 2 hours in the staff room. His face was scruffy with stubble, his eyes hollow, but there was not a hint of regret, because he knew, he owed her something ancient, primal, a vow without words. She's still conscious. A veterinarian whispered beside him. I've never seen a tiger survive 3 consecutive surgeries. Her heart rate is extremely weak. But the strange thing is. What? Waldo asked. She only truly calms down when you're standing here. Waldo turned his head. What did you say? I know it sounds strange. But every time you enter the room, her heartbeat stabilizes. When you leave, it spikes. It's like she knows where you are. He didn't respond, just looked at Zira. She had her eyes open. Not fierce, not in pain. Only that gaze, as deep as an abyss. As still as the forest after a storm. Across the isolation zone, her 2 cubs were being fed with condensed milk and antibiotics. They were still frightened, but no longer trembling. One of them had even begun to walk around the enclosure, a sign of recovery. Waldo was allowed into the sterilized zone and sat close to the glass wall. No camera, no equipment, just man and beast, facing each other again, once more without the need for words. And in that moment, time seemed to stop. Zira closed her eyes, not sleeping, just breathing more slowly, more steadily, more trustingly. And Waldo, who had come to these mountains chasing the light of dawn, realized. The greatest beauty in nature is not found in any photograph. It lives in the moment when 2 souls, even from different species, still recognize each other in a world overwhelmed by noise. 1 week later, on the summit of Langtang, snow fell gently like ashes from a fire long extinguished. The silver-gray sky cast its shadow over the forest that once echoed with roars, the place where Waldo, the photographer who no longer carried a camera, walked slowly, alone. Zira had passed away at dawn that morning. Not because of her wounds, but from exhaustion, from years of running from humans, protecting her cubs, and finally, giving all her strength to save another life. The veterinarians said. Her heart stopped quietly, as if she chose the moment to go. Waldo was there. He held Zira's paw, the same paw that had once left prints across the mountainsides, and whispered, "Thank you, for not killing me that day. Thank you, for showing me that nature is not only brutal, it also knows how to forgive." There was no funeral, no tombstone, only a patch of wild earth, where Zira was buried beneath rock and soil, near the stream where she once led her cubs to drink. Beside her grave, they placed a fossilized bone, a symbol of the ancient forest guardian. Waldo carved a line into stone. Here lies Zira, not a beast, but a mother, not a predator, but a protector. She remembered, and we must too. The 2 tiger cubs were relocated to a secret sanctuary in southern India. They grew up strong and healthy, and when they come of age, they will be returned to the forests of Langtang, where they were born, where, if you listen closely, you might still hear their mother's breath in the morning wind. Waldo? He no longer photographs animals. Instead, he writes, he tells stories, and travels the world, sharing a tale that once seemed unbelievable, about a tiger who didn't roar to kill, but to protect, about a moment between man and beast, where instinct was replaced by trust. Every morning, he still climbs the mountain, not to wait for Zira to return, but to keep a promise. That what she did, will not be forgotten. And if you ever stand on that cliff, on a misty morning, be still. Who knows, the wind might tell you Zira's story. The story of a brave soul, who roared not in rage, but to say thank you. If this story touched your heart, please share it, because somewhere in the world, there may still be another Zira, waiting for someone to believe that the wild also has a heart. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, so we can continue bringing you stories that are real, beautiful, and unforgettable. Because sometimes, life begins again. From the very moment we choose to save a soul the world said wasn't worth saving.